And the question I suppose we should get to with our panelists, who are themselves, path breakers and leaders in education from around the world, is answering this question about, well, how do we prepare our young people for this future of 2030? Now, to give you some context, even prior to COVID, the UN and all government agencies had surmised at this 5-year juncture of the SDGs, saying that, things had already slowed down and we're on target to actually miss the target. And then COVID has come along, which has further compounded the problem. So before COVID, it was tough enough to try to push and achieve those targets. After COVID, who knows what's going to happen? Well, the answer lies in what you're going to say, actually. So how do you think that we can accelerate so learning outcomes improve to the degree that we all aspire for them to do? And what strategies should we actually employ to make sure that this goal is achieved? I want to first go to Alison, if it's okay, from the world's largest lesson. Alison, in terms of how do you prepare young people for 2030, given your focus, especially on the SDGs? I'm keen to hear from you. You have to unmute yourself, Alison.
Basic learning skill I've developed over the last few months. Thanks, Vikas. I think one of the things that we're really trying to do is to encourage students and teachers and communities at large to reframe or re-establish the purpose of education, and to try and move it from in our minds as being something which is purely there to be got through with barriers along the way that can help us get to jobs, pass exams, etc., to repurpose and reframe education as something which is for all of us to be part of in order to create a better and more just and sustainable world. And if we do that, then it helps teachers because it elevates teachers within the whole landscape. And it gives kids a real sense of why they're at school. Why are they having that chemistry lesson? Why are they doing things that sometimes are boring? And we've noticed when we do that, that kids really do, they show up, they take part. It might sound simple, it might sound obvious, but it's an important part of what we've been trying to do.
And so, Alison, just a follow-up question. You are, especially out of all the speakers over here, linked to the SDGs in a formal sense with the UN system. I mean, yeah. What is the thought about the global architecture that exists with regards to how we're going to make up for learning losses and how we're going to actually try to achieve this global target?
I mean, obviously, COVID has created, what was already a crisis has become much more of a catastrophe than anyone could have ever imagined. And one of the big problems now is looking at how we make sure that all children get back into school, and the girls particularly who are at risk of never going back to school. Governments are really focused on making sure that happens. And then the other thing that's obviously become really obvious is how important connectivity is. 50% of the kids who've been out of school have not been able to access learning, and they've had to rely on public media or just local solutions to do it. And the UN at large are working now on big projects like Giga to try and make sure that we're connecting kids across the world so that they can continue to learn.
Thank you so much. I now want to go to Gregg, actually, because what Alison spoke about was local action. And you and your work is very much looking at regional systems transformation, if I may put it that way. Gregg, do you want to tell us a little bit about your work and what your vision is in terms of how we can achieve this stretch target that's been set in front of us because of our circumstances?
Thank you, Vikas. I agree with everything that Alison said, and I also believe deeply that what she said has to matter in places like towns called Newcastle and Clareton and Duquesne, and places that we can all imagine in the places where we reside. So as we think ahead to 2030, there are, of course, 57 things that we need to do. But what I appreciate about what Alison said is the context and circumstances in which learning happens. And I want to highlight two things that I think we really need to do. One is engaging and involving parents, families, and caregivers like never before, taking advantage of the empathy that parents have built up and really establishing them as learning allies in incredible ways. And then 2, really changing public mindsets in a region, in a place where we reside about what learning can be. So Vikas, let me make that very concrete for you. So in this region, where for 15 years, a learning ecosystem called Remake Learning has been endeavoring to connect what's happening in and out of school from the early years through high school. 5 years ago, we launched something called Remake Learning Days. So think about your city, your region as a campus full with family-friendly events held at schools, libraries, museums, a joyful amusement park full of experiences where adults and kids alike are learning, STEM learning, STEAM learning, project-based learning. Hundreds of events held over 1 week, attracting tens of thousands of families. Why do we do this? 1, to help families understand how learning is being remade. 2, to support families as they embrace new ways of learning for their kids. And then 3, to encourage families and parents and caregivers to ask their schools, their libraries, their after-school programs about what they're doing and how they're embracing new ways of learning to the future that our young people will enter into. And then secondly, Vikas, we've got to build public will. Remake Learning this past 5 months or so launched a campaign called Remake Tomorrow. The idea was to build a sensibility, not just about the things that we need to do right now, but the learning that we need post-pandemic. It was a campaign that consisted of more than $1.5 million distributed to local schools and other learning sites, articles, reports, more than 60 events. What are the results of this? More than 24 million people reached online, more than 27,000 actual engagements, more than 14,000 attendees. I mention these numbers because this is how we build public will in places like Newcastle and Duquesne and Clareton and all of the places around the world where we need to change what we're doing.
Gregg, just for the benefit of everyone watching, where exactly are you in the world today?
So I'm in Pittsburgh in the state of Pennsylvania, a place garnering worldwide coverage right now for all sorts of reasons. I'm in the United States.
So, Gregg, apart from other events that are taking place in the US that we're all watching at the moment, can you tell us what you what you said sounds really cool, actually. Does it work? What is the evidence that you have for your approach actually working? Because when I look at schools around the world, they try to do exactly what you are, and yet statistics don't show the same uplift as what you're saying. So what is it in the water and where you are that seems to be having an impact?
It works. It's active, it's community organizing, it's community mobilizing, and it's years of tireless work. It is the work of campaign building. And we have hired all sorts of evaluation experts over this past decade and a half, including the Global Family Research Project, which in particular has done studies of the parents, families, and caregivers who come to Remake Learning Days events. And we now have nearly 5 years worth of data. And we've seen in that data the upward trajectory of the ways in which parents understand STEM and STEAM learning, the value that they attach to new ways of learning, while still appreciating the things that are timeless and classic about learning, like the role of nurturing relationships. The real key is about how we forge what is timeless and classic with these new ways of learning. And we have the data to demonstrate that parents and families are valuing it in a different way. And then also the experience of schools, museums, libraries making different decisions about how they're spending their budgets, how they're building spaces, how they're investing in professional development and learning. So, yes.
Thanks a lot. Kim, I now come to you in your work. Please, before you speak, though, tell us where you are.
I'm in Northern California, USA.
Wonderful. So tell us about your work and how we should approach what we are trying to explore through your perspective and your lens.
Yeah, so hashtag I Can Help is we get to empower student changemakers, promote digital safety, and then we get to celebrate youth innovation. So it's all around the digital space, right? So digital citizenship and digital wellness, which is now found out we need this more than ever, right? So we were doing this since 2013. And students, there's been surveys, we're addicted to cell phone devices, 50% of them. So now can you imagine how many of that is? Now of how much addiction, even adults, how many are there addicted? And so it is trying to figure out, we really believe in the digital wellness is such a key, important part. 1 out of 5 students have some kind of mental health issue. That's before COVID, but 5 out of 5 students have mental health, right? Even humans, 5 out of 5 people have mental health, right? So we really believe that we need to start having conversations more frequently about digital wellness and about wellness and mental health, right? Like that just needs to be done. And you need to use social media to do it, because 48% of students are not turning to adults to have conversations anymore. Where are they turning? They're turning to their online communities, they're turning to their peers. So now you got 13-year-olds talking to 13-year-olds about their anxiety, about their depression, and they're not turning to adults. But we need to change that, because as adults, we still need to be in their life. So we really believe in the side-by-side model, where adults need to be walking side by side with students, not in front of them and not behind them. So if your students are on TikTok, you should be on TikTok knowing what that is, so you can have conversations. You're going to see a different TikTok than them. What's called your For You page is going to be different than theirs, of course. But at least you know the lingo and you can talk to them about it. That's so key. That's so important, because then you can talk about the digital wellness with them. Hey, how much time do you spend on your TikTok? Because once you jump in the TikTok, what we call rabbit hole, like you can stay in there for a long time. So it's so important that we get every teacher talking about mental health and digital wellness with them. How are you, after you have all these Zoom calls, how are you getting away from that? What are you doing to make sure you're getting away from the screen? We've had events with people like Twitter where we get to bring students into the room with these Twitter employees and get to have those conversations, and hearing Twitter employees flat out say that they have bought a real alarm clock instead of using their phone as to wake up, right? So I think that's so important. Or that now Samsung, if you don't know this, but Samsung just has the screen time. Used to be just the iPhones. Now Samsung has done the same thing. So setting your screen times for how long you're going to allow yourself to be on certain apps, so it can help with your digital wellness, and then making those choices. So really adults walking alongside the students to be able to have the conversations about mental health and digital wellness. And we call it, so that way they feel comfortable if they ever need to go to what we call a talking doctor. Everyone goes to a regular doctor, but we also need to sometimes go to a talking doctor when we get into these kind of situations. Because suicide in the United States for 10 to 24-year-olds is the number 2 cause of death. And it's in some states, it's now number 1.
Kim, that's a fantastic contribution in terms of something that I, as a parent, worry about all the time. And actually, my kids refuse to even give me their TikTok handle, so I can't follow them. And so I fully agree with you, and actually provides a great segue to asking Shaheen, from your context in India. We hear a lot of innovation that's happened as a result of the use of phones over the last 6 months. Shaheen, tell me, in terms of given where India is, not geographically, but with regards to its status, with regards to education, what can we hope for children in India by the year 2030, given that you also have a new education policy that's been unveiled by the government?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, it's just beautiful to share a panel with people that your thoughts resonated so deeply with me, and I'm kicking myself that I didn't read up a lot about your work before this panel, but I will do that. A little bit of the truth and hope by way of response, I think, Vikas, to you. If we look just at Teach for India's ecosystem of about 32,000 children, when the pandemic hit, in more than 70% of them had no access. But overnight, they not only needed education, but they also needed rations and food. And so it's been a major reorganizing for the organization to become a relief organization, and then to go out aggressively and try and procure devices for our children. So I think India faces like a huge need to confront how us moving ahead doesn't even further push our poorest children into deeper poverty and deeper learning poverty. So that's sort of the truth that we grapple with. I think the hope is that this new way of blended learning, so that we've tried to embrace at Teach for India, everything from scrambling to finding devices to actually changing the very way our children learn, has been so incredibly powerful. Like all the questions we had, can we spread love to children online? Can we build culture online? Can we involve parents? I think, as Gregg said, suddenly, like, the definition of the teacher has changed. The definition of learning hours has changed. Like, the world has become the school. And I think that's really been so beautiful to see. I visit a lot of classrooms, and now I'm doing a lot of virtual classroom visits, and I don't think I've seen classrooms that are actually as engaging and as beautiful in many ways as I'm seeing now. So I think that's the hope. The question really is, does the government, the new education policy espouses really lofty and very far-reaching goals? The question is the government going to put in the resources and what it takes to actually get that down to the last mile and the last child? And so I think that's what we're wrapping our heads around right now.
Shaheen, in terms of, when people think of India nowadays, especially when it comes to education, we hear about some incredible stories about the use of edtech. So you'll have, for example, a craze of the use of online platforms like Byju's or that kind of thing. But tell us, in terms of when you talk about the last child or the last mile, what technologies are being used actually to look at education in India for that population who can't afford subscriptions, who cannot afford membership or tuitions on online platforms? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think people are trying a range of different things, right? From radio to TV to printed learning packages, really trying to just reach children in every way possible. I think the piece I would add to the dialogue, Vikas, is while there are incredible resources online for content, I'm not sure we've been able to figure out how to deliver a truly holistic education online. And what would that look like? Maybe not in 100% online version, but in a blended version. So Alison beautifully sort of shared the purpose of education. I think at Teach for India, we say really, we're trying to create a world free of poverty and filled with love for all of our children. And what's the education in service of that? And how can technology help with that? I think that's what we need to be asking ourselves. And I think maybe it's possible, like suddenly technology can bring large numbers of mentors to individual children. It can help kids curate content. There's always a chance for learning circles and kids to meet in person to process their learning and to dialogue with each other. So I think we need to move away from thinking fully digital to thinking blended and asking ourselves, what are the blended models that can actually scale? And how do we build values through this new form of education? I'll just say one more quick thing, which was sparked by what Kim was sharing. One of our kids' education revolutionary students, 10th grade, so this is like height of peer pressure, she actually chose to move from a big city to a village to spend a year sort of discovering the purpose of life. And one of the first things she did was she said, I'm getting fully offline. And so the only thing she does is uses email sort of as a letter writing. But it's so fascinating to think of the pressure that kids face today, but also to ask ourselves, like, are we preparing them to think independently and differently? Why are they so unaware of what the systemic forces are doing to them today? And how can we really prepare them for that?
Well, thanks a lot, Shaheen. Thanks a lot to all of you for your time for today's panel discussion. Ideally, I would have loved to have more time with you. The one thing that I would like everyone that's watching, and including actually the panelists, to contribute towards this discussion is quite simply, what do you see as the silver lining coming out of this pandemic when it comes to education? So what is in American language, use of phraseology, you'd say, what is the moonshot that we can achieve as a result of the circumstances that we've gone through? And I want you to go to Twitter or whichever platform you use and use the hashtag HundrED and tell us what your silver lining is. I think it'll be a fascinating tapestry of inputs that we'll get, because we can often get bogged down in, this is now an impossible thing to achieve. We are drowning, and turn that entire narrative into, well, this is the art of the possible. Now, having finished on that note, I hand over to Saku, who, again, is demonstrating the art of the possible by bringing everyone together to make sure that we discuss exactly that. How do we reimagine education? Saku, over to you.
Thank you, Vikas, and don't go away yet, because I have one short question which is building actually on the last comment you made regarding the silver linings and so on. We've been discussing a lot with our community and also with people like Andrea Schleicher, and there's a worry in the education community that actually the world where we are going back after this, all of this is over, post-COVID, might actually be even more traditional than what it was before COVID. So it's kind of like stepping back in time, and all the positive development is vanishing. So how would you say is that in order to get where we want to be getting in 2030, how should we think and see the fall of 2021 or spring of 2022? Meaning is that should it be some sort of hybrid? What would be kind of like the first steps towards to a new world of education? Short questions from anyone. You can decide, Vikas.
I'll go to Alison first, please.
Well, I would leverage this situation, and I would use the fact that next year is a really big focus year for climate. We have COP at the end of the year, and climate education is on the agenda, and we must get countries to sign up and say that they will educate for climate across the world, and get countries working together to find solutions with teachers to make it happen. And I would use this moment so that by the beginning of 2022, that's what we're looking at, a list of countries who are doing it.
Great. Alison, at World Education Week, we had a showcase from a school in Bangladesh, which is on a boat that has absolutely nailed how they teach their kids about climate resilience. I'd encourage you to have a look at that. Kim, I now come to you.
Yeah, I mean, I really believe that you need to have a foundation. And, you know, even with the online world, our company is really known. We have over, 300 students across the nation and even in 4 countries, that they really feel like they came to us because we're a home to them, right? Like that we're a true community to them. So I really think you need to make sure your community is built and they feel strong, and that you get companies, schools, and students to bridge that gap, because we have to become a community in order to, whatever is the next thing that comes, you're way stronger, and that you're way more powerful together when you can make things happen. Yesterday, I was so inspired by the food farming that, you know, one country had to do. Like, that was incredible. And you couldn't have done that if you didn't really quickly create that community piece. So no matter what it is, online, offline community, you have to have both and get that really strong.
Thank you. And Greg?
I would embrace parents, families, and caregivers as learning allies. We spoke to the empathy that has been built up in families as they better appreciate teachers and what happens in classrooms, but they've also built up a lot of frustrations too, right? And so as we look to the next school year and the years beyond, how do we really rethink family engagement? How do we think about maybe positions as directors of relationships in schools that are really forging new family engagement strategies? Because even absent a pandemic, Vikas, all of our work always is in danger of being faddish unless we really engage parents, families, and caregivers. Because I feel like if we engage families, the work then becomes sticky, because families value it, they want it, they start asking their school boards about it, they start asking elected officials about it. If parents value this new way of learning, then the new way of learning will be inevitable.
Wonderful, thank you. And Shaheen?
I would say students as partners at every level of the system. Like, this is the dream that keeps me awake at night, right? Like, why are we not, half of us on this panel today, students? Every education conference, every dialogue, every time an education policy is written, every time a classroom is taught, can we move from doing this for our children to doing this with our children? They have the idealism, the love, the hope. They want to solve education and change it. They have the highest stakes, and yet we leave them out of the dialogue. So I think that's really where the biggest hope is.
Saku, my response to this, and it wouldn't surprise you given my focus for the last decade or so, is around strengthening the capacity of the teaching profession. We know that, and Andreas is quite famous for having coined this phrase, which is no education system can outperform the quality of its teachers. And that stands true. And we have to actually place them, as important as the kids, we have to also place them in our considerations very deeply, because the health of that profession is critical to all of us achieving our goals.